Evelyn closed her eyes as the warm water enveloped her. The light scent of chamomile and vanilla swirling around her. It was moments like these, rare and fleeting, that she felt at peace. The house was still. The only sounds coming from the occasional creak of the old wood floors or the gentle sway of the trees outside her bathroom window. Her husband, Richard, had been gone for 3 days now on one of his countless business trips. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, Evelyn had grown accustomed to the solitude that came with his career. Their lives had drifted into a rhythm of long absences punctuated by brief reunions, each marked by polite conversation and the routines of shared meals. Still, the silence felt heavier lately, and she couldn't shake the sense of longing that seemed to follow her around the house. She tried to fill her days with gardening, yoga classes, and afternoons spent catching up on books she had always meant to read. But something still felt amiss. Her thoughts wandered, as they often did, to her family. Evelyn was immensely proud of her daughter Clara, who had built a thriving career as a graphic designer and recently celebrated her 2nd wedding anniversary with Ryan. Ryan had been a welcome addition to the family, a charming, easygoing man who seemed to know how to light up any room he entered. Evelyn smiled faintly, recalling how Ryan had charmed their entire extended family during holiday gatherings with his quick wit and thoughtful gestures. He had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and valued, a trait Evelyn admired. But over the past few months, their interactions had felt different. There was something unspoken lingering in the air whenever they were alone. A spark of energy she couldn't quite name. She dismissed the thought as quickly as it came, embarrassed by her own musings. "It's nothing," she told herself firmly. "I'm reading into things that aren't there." A sudden sound startled her, a gentle knock on the bathroom door. Evelyn's eyes snapped open, her heart racing slightly at the unexpected interruption. "Evelyn." The voice on the other side of the door was familiar, warm, and unmistakably Ryan's. She hesitated before answering, her voice tinged with surprise. "Ryan? Is something wrong?" No, he said quickly. "I didn't mean to bother you. Clara mentioned you weren't feeling well earlier this week, and I wanted to check on you. Are you all right?" Evelyn blinked, momentarily disarmed by his thoughtfulness. "I'm fine. Really. Just taking a bath." There was a pause. And for a moment, Evelyn thought he might leave. But then his voice came again, soft and almost hesitant. "Would it be okay if I came in for a second? Just to say hi?" Her breath caught in her throat. The request felt unusual, even inappropriate. But his tone was casual, innocent. Almost. She wrestled with herself for a moment, unsure of what to say. "All right," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. But just for a moment. The door creaked open, and Ryan stepped inside, his figure silhouetted against the warm glow of the hallway light. He was dressed casually in a gray t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly disheveled as if he had just returned from running errands. He leaned against the doorframe, his expression open and relaxed. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said with a sheepish grin. "I just wanted to make sure you didn't need anything." Evelyn smiled, her initial nervousness giving way to a flicker of warmth at his genuine concern. "I'm fine. Really. Just enjoying a bit of quiet time." Ryan nodded. But instead of leaving, he stepped further into the room, his hands shoved into his pockets. His gaze lingered on her face for a moment before drifting to the steamy surface of the bathwater. "It looks really relaxing," he said with a chuckle. "I could use something like that after the week I've had." Evelyn tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "Rough week?" He sighed. running a hand through his hair. You could say that. Work's been non-stop. And Clara's been busy with her projects. Sometimes it feels like we're two ships passing in the night. Evelyn's heart twinged at his words. Recognizing the sentiment all too well. Marriage can be like that, she said softly. Especially when life gets busy. But you two always seem so happy together. Ryan smiled faintly. But there was a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. We are, he said after a pause. But I don't know. Lately, it feels like something's missing. Like we're not connecting the way we used to. Evelyn's chest tightened. She wanted to say something comforting. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she offered him a sympathetic look. Hoping it conveyed the understanding she felt. Ryan's eyes met hers. And for a moment, the air between them seemed to shift. The casual, light-hearted tone of their conversation gave way to something deeper. More charged. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. Her breath catching in her throat. You've always been easy to talk to. Evelyn. Ryan said quietly. His voice laced with warmth. I don't know how you do it. But you have this way of making people feel safe. She opened her mouth to respond. But the words didn't come. Instead, she found herself lost in his gaze. The intensity of his expression sending a rush of heat through her. I should go. Ryan said abruptly. Breaking the moment. He took a step back. His easy smile returning. I just wanted to check on you. Clara worries. You know. Evelyn nodded. Her voice steadied despite the fluttering in her chest. Thank you. Ryan. That was kind of you. As he turned to leave. She watched him go. Her thoughts swirling with confusion and something else, something she wasn't ready to name. The door clicked shut. Leaving Evelyn alone once more in the steamy bathroom. She sank back into the bath. The water now cooling against her skin. But the warmth of the interaction lingered. She stared at the rippling surface. Trying to make sense of the moment that had just passed. Ryan's words replayed in her mind. Each one weighted with a sincerity that both comforted and unsettled her. You've always been easy to talk to. You make people feel safe. It was a simple compliment. But something about the way he'd said it felt different. She shook her head. Trying to brush aside the thought. It's nothing. She told herself. He's just kind. That's all. But the fluttering in her chest refused to subside. Later that evening, Evelyn moved about the kitchen. Preparing a simple dinner. The soft hum of the kettle and the rhythmic chop of vegetables offered a comforting backdrop. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to Ryan. She wondered if he'd gone home to Clara. Whether they were sitting together at the table or curled up on the couch watching TV. She hoped they were. She wanted them to be happy, she truly did. The sound of her phone buzzing on the counter pulled her from her thoughts. She wiped her hands on a towel and picked it up. Her heart skipping a beat when she saw Ryan's name on the screen. The message was casual, thanks for letting me check in earlier. Hope you're feeling better. Evelyn hesitated before typing a response. Thank you for stopping by. It was sweet of you to check on me. She stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send. The words felt innocuous enough. Yet she couldn't ignore the slight thrill she felt when the message delivered. The following week passed in a blur of routine. Evelyn busied herself with errands and appointments. Doing her best to push her lingering thoughts of Ryan aside. But life had a way of throwing unexpected moments her way. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Evelyn decided to visit the farmer's market downtown. She loved the vibrancy of the place, the bright colors of fresh produce. The mingling aromas of baked goods and flowers. It was her sanctuary. A place where she could lose herself in the simple pleasures of life. As she browsed a stall of ripe peaches, a familiar voice called out behind her. Evelyn. She turned to see Ryan approaching. A canvas bag slung over his shoulder and a wide smile on his face. Ryan, she said. Her surprise evident. What are you doing here? He held up the bag. Clara wanted some fresh veggies for dinner tonight. So I thought I'd swing by. And you? Stocking up for the week? Evelyn nodded. A small smile tugging at her lips. It's my Saturday ritual. I love the atmosphere here. Same. Ryan said, falling into step beside her as they moved to the next stall. It's nice to slow down for a bit. You know. They wandered through the market together, chatting about everything from their favorite seasonal fruits to their shared love of fresh baked bread. Evelyn found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. The light-hearted conversation easing the tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. At one point, Ryan reached out to steady her when she stumbled over an uneven cobblestone. His hand lingered on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. And when their eyes met, Evelyn felt her breath catch. Careful, he said softly, his voice laced with concern. Thank you, she murmured, her cheeks warming. They parted ways an hour later, each carrying bags of fresh produce and pastries. But as Evelyn walked back to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them again. That evening, Evelyn was curled up on the couch with a book when her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was more direct. I really enjoyed today. It's always nice spending time with you. Evelyn's heart raced as she read the words. She knew she should feel guilty. But instead, she felt a warmth spread through her. She typed out a quick reply. I enjoyed it too. Thank you for making me laugh. The conversation continued from there, each message pulling her deeper into the connection that had begun to form. They talked about their favorite places to travel, their dream meals, even the books they were reading. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Evelyn realized she hadn't felt this alive in years. A few days later, Ryan showed up at Evelyn's house again. This time, it was late in the afternoon, and she was out in the garden pruning her roses. Hey, he called out, leaning over the gate with his trademark grin. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Hope that's okay. Evelyn smiled, brushing her hands on her gardening apron. Of course. Come on in. They sat on the back patio, sipping iced tea and talking about everything and nothing. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the garden. And Evelyn felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. As they talked, Ryan leaned forward, his gaze earnest. You know, Evelyn, I always feel like I can be myself around you. Like I don't have to put on a show. Evelyn's chest tightened at his words. She reached out without thinking, placing a hand over his. I feel the same way, she admitted softly. The moment hung between them, charged and unspoken. Ryan's hand turned under hers, his fingers brushing against her palm in a way that sent a shiver up her spine. But before either of them could speak, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the spell. Evelyn quickly withdrew her hand, her heart racing as they both turned toward the noise. The sound of the car in the driveway sent a ripple of reality through Evelyn's serene garden. She stood abruptly, brushing her hands on her apron, her cheeks warm. Ryan cleared his throat, straightening in his chair as if they'd both been caught doing something wrong. It's probably the delivery guy, Evelyn said quickly, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her nerves. Ryan gave a small nod, his easy smile returning. Well, I should probably head out anyway. Clara's waiting on me to grab dinner. Evelyn walked him to the gate. Their conversation stilted now, as if the spell of their connection had been momentarily broken. As Ryan stepped out onto the sidewalk, he turned back to her, his expression softer than before. "Thanks for letting me drop by," he said. "I always feel better after talking to you." Evelyn offered him a faint smile, her heart heavy with unspoken emotions. "You're always welcome here, Ryan." As she watched him walk away, a sense of longing settled over her. She couldn't deny the connection between them, but she also couldn't ignore the line they were teetering dangerously close to crossing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for Evelyn. She busied herself with tasks around the house, trying to focus on anything but the growing tension between her and Ryan. But no matter how much she tried to distract herself, thoughts of him lingered. Their conversations over text became more frequent, though always casual on the surface. He'd send her pictures of something funny he'd seen at work or a new dish he'd tried cooking. She found herself looking forward to his messages, her heart lifting whenever his name appeared on her phone. One afternoon, as Evelyn was rearranging the bookshelves in the living room, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo of Ryan holding up a homemade loaf of bread, his grin as wide as ever. "Not bad for a first try." "Huh?" Evelyn laughed, shaking her head as she replied. "Looks better than my attempts. You'll have to teach me your secret." The response came almost immediately. "Only if you promise to let me use your kitchen." Her heart fluttered at the idea. She hesitated for a moment before typing back. "Deal. When are you free?" The following Saturday. Ryan arrived at Evelyn's house with a bag of ingredients and his signature charm. He walked into the kitchen like he'd been there 1,000 times before, setting down the bag and rolling up his sleeves. "You're in for a treat," he said, pulling out flour, yeast, and a jar of honey. Evelyn smiled, tying an apron around her waist. "I'll believe it when I see it." They spent the next hour kneading dough, flour dusting their hands and the counters. The atmosphere was light and playful, their laughter filling the space in a way that made the house feel alive again. At one point, Ryan smudged a bit of flour on Evelyn's nose, grinning mischievously as she gasped in mock outrage. "Oh, you're going to regret that," she said, dipping her fingers into the flour bag and flicking some at him. They devolved into a brief but spirited flour fight, the kitchen a mess of laughter and white powder by the time they stopped. Evelyn leaned against the counter, her cheeks flushed and her breath coming in soft pants. Ryan was standing close, too close. She could see the flecks of flour in his hair, the way his chest rose and fell with his breathing. Their eyes met, and the playful energy between them shifted into something deeper, something heavier. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Ryan. We." But whatever she was going to say was lost as he reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her skin, his gaze searching hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both tentative and electric. Evelyn froze, her mind racing even as her body responded. She felt his warmth, the softness of his lips, and the undeniable pull of the moment. But as much as she wanted to give in, a voice in the back of her mind screamed for her to stop. She pulled back abruptly, her hand coming up to her mouth as if to erase the kiss. "Ryan. We can't," she said, her voice trembling. He looked at her, his expression a mix of regret and longing. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help it." Evelyn turned away, her emotions swirling. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "To Clara. To Richard. To us." Ryan stepped back, giving her space. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I didn't mean to make things complicated." But they both knew it was too late. The following days were strained. Ryan kept his distance, though he still sent the occasional text, carefully neutral, as if trying to restore some semblance of normalcy. Evelyn responded politely, but the easy flow of their conversations was gone. She threw herself into her routines, hoping to bury the feelings that had been stirred. But every time she saw Ryan's name on her phone or caught a glimpse of his photo on Clara's social media, the memory of that kiss came rushing back. One evening, Clara called her, her voice cheerful as she chatted about work and her latest projects. Evelyn listened intently, guilt gnawing at her as she tried to focus on her daughter's words. "Ryan's been working late a lot lately," Clara said casually. "But he seems happier these days. Less stressed. You know." Evelyn's heart sank. She wanted to ask more, to find out what Clara really thought. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "That's good to hear. You two deserve to be happy." Clara laughed softly. "Thanks, Mom. You always know the right thing to say." Evelyn hung up the phone feeling heavier than ever. She couldn't ignore the connection she felt with Ryan, but the weight of what it meant loomed larger with each passing day. Evelyn sat on her porch late one evening, nursing a cup of chamomile tea. The sky was painted in hues of deep purple and indigo, stars just beginning to peek through the velvety darkness. The serenity of the night should have comforted her, but her thoughts were far from peaceful. She couldn't stop replaying the kiss in her mind, its tenderness, its urgency. She thought of Ryan's eyes, the way they held hers in that moment, filled with emotions she wasn't ready to confront. She sighed, setting her tea aside. "This can't go on," she thought. "I have to find a way to put this behind me." But deep down, a part of her didn't want to let go of the spark she felt when she was with him. The sound of her phone buzzing pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Ryan's name. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message. "Can we talk? Just us. I promise it won't take long." Evelyn stared at the message, her mind racing. She knew she should say no, that talking to him alone would only complicate things further. But her fingers betrayed her, typing out a response before she could stop herself. "Okay. Tomorrow afternoon." The next day, Evelyn sat in the quiet of her living room, her nerves on edge as she waited for Ryan to arrive. She had spent the morning rehearsing what she would say, determined to draw a firm line between them. When the knock finally came, she took a deep breath and opened the door. Ryan stood there, his expression serious yet soft. "Hi," he said, his voice low. "Hi," Evelyn replied, stepping aside to let him in. They settled on the couch, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Ryan was the first to break it. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "And I know I messed up. I crossed a line. And I hate that I've put you in this position." Evelyn swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Ryan, we both crossed a line. But it has to stop here. For Clara's sake. For both of our sakes." He nodded, but there was a flicker of pain in his eyes. "I know. I can't pretend I don't feel something for you. Evelyn. I've tried. But it's there. And I think you feel it too. Her breath hitched at his words. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Ryan. Whatever this is. It can't happen. It's not fair to anyone. I know, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. But I needed you to know how I feel. Even if nothing comes of it. I couldn't keep it to myself. Evelyn's heart ached at his honesty. She reached out, placing a hand on his. Ryan. You're a good man. And I care about you more than I should. But this isn't right. We have to let it go. He looked at her then. His eyes filled with a mix of longing and acceptance. I don't want to lose what we have, he said softly. You won't, she said. Her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. But it has to change. For all of us. Ryan nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly as he exhaled. You're right. I'll respect your decision. Evelyn. I owe you that. In the days that followed, Evelyn and Ryan kept their distance. Their texts became infrequent. Their interactions during family gatherings careful and polite. The connection between them was still there. But they both worked to bury it beneath layers of restraint. Evelyn focused on her family, pouring her energy into her relationship with Clara. She took her daughter out for lunch, helped her with her projects, and made an effort to strengthen their bond. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't entirely shake the memory of Ryan, the way he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was during one of these family gatherings that everything came to a head. The family had gathered at Evelyn's house for dinner. The air filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. Evelyn moved about the kitchen, her smile fixed in place as she tried to keep her thoughts from wandering. Ryan was there. Of course. His presence a constant undercurrent in the room. He chatted easily with Clara and Richard, his charm as effortless as ever. But every now and then, Evelyn caught his eyes lingering on her. A silent reminder of everything they weren't saying. As the evening wore on, Evelyn found herself alone in the kitchen, tidying up after the meal. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Ryan standing in the doorway. Need any help? He asked. His tone casual but his eyes betraying something deeper. Evelyn hesitated before nodding. Sure. You can dry. They worked side by side in silence, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Ryan spoke. Evelyn. I miss talking to you. Really talking. She set down the dish she was holding, her hands trembling slightly. Ryan. We can't keep doing this. It's not fair to Clara. Or to you. Or to me. I know, he said, his voice heavy. But it doesn't make it any easier. Evelyn turned to face him, her expression firm. We have to let it go. Ryan. For everyone's sake. He nodded, though the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. I just want you to know how much you mean to me. And I'll always be here for you. No matter what. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you, Ryan. That means a lot. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn worked to rebuild her life. She focused on her marriage, making an effort to reconnect with Richard during his time at home. Ryan, too, seemed to be focusing on his own life. He and Clara began planning a trip together, something to rekindle the spark in their marriage. Evelyn was happy for them, even if a part of her still ached for what might have been. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to move forward. To find peace in the life she had built. And though the memories of her connection with Ryan would always remain, she knew they were just that, memories. Beautiful, fleeting moments that had shaped her. But that she had to leave behind. Evelyn stood by the window, gazing out at the garden as sunlight danced through the leaves. The roses she had carefully nurtured over the years were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the heaviness in her chest. It had been weeks since the dinner where she and Ryan had exchanged their quiet words in the kitchen. True to his promise, he had kept his distance. And Evelyn had done the same. Their interactions at family events were cordial, their words measured. From the outside, nothing appeared amiss. But Evelyn knew better. She had thrown herself into her routines, hoping the rhythm of her days would dull the ache. Mornings spent tending the garden, afternoons volunteering at the library, evenings cooking meals for herself and Richard when he was home. Yet, in the stillness of the night, her thoughts often wandered back to Ryan. One evening, Clara called Evelyn with an idea. "Mom," Clara began, her voice bright. "Ryan and I are thinking about taking a weekend trip to the mountains. It's been ages since we had some time just for us." Evelyn's heart lifted at the news. "That sounds wonderful. Sweetheart, you both deserve it." "We thought so too," Clara said with a laugh. "Ryan suggested it. Actually, he's been so thoughtful lately. I feel like we're finally in sync again." Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat, her emotions a mix of relief and sadness. "I'm glad to hear that, Clara." "Really?" After hanging up, Evelyn sat in silence for a long while. She thought about Ryan's efforts to rebuild his relationship with Clara. And she realized that, in a way, she had been part of that process. Their connection had forced them both to confront their emotions and make difficult choices. It wasn't the love she had imagined for herself. But perhaps it was a kind of love nonetheless, one that allowed her to let go. To step aside so that Clara and Ryan could find their happiness. Richard's business trips had become shorter lately, and he had begun spending more time at home. Evelyn wasn't sure if it was a coincidence or if he had noticed something in her demeanor. But she welcomed the change. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Richard reached over and took her hand. "You've been quieter lately," he said, his tone gentle. "Is everything all right?" Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to put her feelings into words. She couldn't tell him the whole truth, it would shatter everything they had built. Instead, she gave him a small smile. "I've just been thinking a lot," she said. "About us. About life." Richard nodded, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "I know I haven't always been around as much as I should. But I'm here now. Evelyn. Whatever you need. I want to be here for you." His words brought tears to her eyes. For so long, she had felt like an afterthought in their marriage. But in this moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Thank you, Richard," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." Evelyn began to focus on herself in the weeks that followed. She took up painting, something she had always wanted to try but had never made time for. She enrolled in a watercolor class at the local community center. And for the first time in years, she felt a spark of excitement at the prospect of creating something beautiful. Her interactions with Ryan became less frequent, though they remained amicable. At family gatherings, she noticed how attentive he was to Clara. How he made her laugh and brought out the best in her. It hurt. But it also gave Evelyn a sense of peace. She had made the right decision, even if it hadn't been an easy one. Clara and Ryan's trip to the mountains marked a turning point for all of them. When Clara called Evelyn afterward, her voice was filled with joy. It was perfect. "Mom," she said. "We talked about everything, work, the future, even starting a family someday. I feel like we're on the same page again." Evelyn smiled as she listened, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and longing. "I'm so happy for you, Clara. You two deserve this." As she hung up the phone, Evelyn realized that she, too, was finding her footing again. The pain of letting go was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Evelyn's painting became a source of solace, and she found herself spending more time with Richard, rediscovering the quiet companionship they had once shared. One afternoon, as she was tidying the house, she came across a small note tucked into the pages of one of her books. It was from Ryan. "Evelyn, thank you for everything, for listening, for understanding, and for helping me find my way. I'll always cherish the time we spent together, even if it wasn't meant to last. You've taught me so much, and I'll never forget that. With gratitude, Ryan." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as she read the words. She folded the note carefully and tucked it back into the book, a bittersweet smile on her face. She knew their connection would always hold a special place in her heart. But it was time to move forward. One evening, as Evelyn and Richard sat together watching the stars, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in a long time. The garden was quiet, the roses gently swaying in the breeze, and the world felt at peace. Richard reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full of gratitude for the life they had built together. Beneath the quiet skies, she let go of the past and embraced the future, knowing that love, whether fleeting or enduring, was a gift that had shaped her in ways she would carry forever. The seasons shifted, bringing cool autumn breezes that whispered through the trees and scattered leaves across Evelyn's garden. Life had begun to settle into a calm rhythm, one that felt more balanced and intentional. Evelyn continued to nurture her roses, their vibrant blooms now a source of comfort and joy rather than a distraction from her thoughts. Ryan and Clara's relationship seemed stronger than ever. During a family dinner at Clara's house, Evelyn watched as they worked together seamlessly in the kitchen, laughing and teasing as they prepared a meal for everyone. It warmed her heart to see Clara so happy. Ryan was as polite and charming as always, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor toward Evelyn. Their interactions were warm but reserved, respectful of the boundaries they had carefully rebuilt. Evelyn appreciated the effort he made, even as she felt the occasional pang of what might have been. "Mom, you've got to try this," Clara said, setting a plate of perfectly grilled salmon in front of her. "Ryan's taken up cooking lately, and he's actually getting good at it." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride for both of them. "I'd say he's more than good. This looks incredible." Ryan caught her eye briefly, his smile modest. "I've had a good teacher," he said, his tone light but meaningful. Evelyn nodded, acknowledging the sentiment without words. As winter approached, Evelyn found herself more engrossed in her painting. The watercolor class had turned into a full-fledged passion, and her instructor encouraged her to showcase her work at a local community exhibition. At first, Evelyn hesitated. She had always been reserved about sharing her personal projects, but the idea of stepping out of her comfort zone felt liberating. With Richard's support, she decided to participate. The night of the exhibition was chilly, the air crisp as Evelyn and Richard walked hand in hand to the event. The gallery buzzed with activity. And Evelyn felt a mix of excitement and nerves as she saw her paintings displayed among other works of art. "Look at this one," Richard said, stopping in front of a piece she had titled Reflections. It was a serene depiction of a garden at sunset. The colors soft and warm, with a solitary figure seated on a bench. "It's beautiful," Richard said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've captured something so peaceful here. It feels like you." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat as she smiled at him. "Thank you," she said softly. Throughout the evening, she received compliments and encouragement from strangers and friends alike. It was a moment of personal triumph. A reminder that she could find fulfillment and purpose in her own pursuits. Several months later, Evelyn received a surprising message from Ryan. "I wanted to thank you again for everything. Clara and I are moving to a new place soon. And I feel like we're finally where we need to be. I hope we can stay in touch in some way. But if not, please know I'll always wish you the best." The message was bittersweet, but Evelyn felt a deep sense of closure as she read it. She replied simply, "I'm happy for you both. You'll always have my best wishes. Take care, Ryan." She knew it was the final chapter of their connection. A goodbye that felt both inevitable and freeing. Spring returned, bringing with it new life and renewed hope. Evelyn spent her mornings in the garden, her afternoons at the library or painting, and her evenings with Richard, who had become more attentive and present in their marriage. One day, as she trimmed the roses, Richard came outside with 2 cups of tea. "Thought you might need a break," he said, handing her a cup. Evelyn smiled, setting down her shears. They sat together on the garden bench, the sunlight filtering through the leaves above them. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Richard asked after a moment, his tone reflective. "Every day," Evelyn replied, her gaze fixed on the blooms before her. "Life doesn't always go the way we expect. But somehow, it has a way of leading us to where we need to be." Richard nodded, taking her hand in his. "I'm glad we're here together." "So am I," Evelyn said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. As they sat there, surrounded by the beauty of the garden, Evelyn felt a profound sense of peace. The past had shaped her, yes, but it no longer defined her. She was exactly where she needed to be, beneath the quiet skies, with her feet firmly planted in the present and her heart open to whatever came next. Much later that evening, as Evelyn organized some old papers, she came across a letter she had written months ago but never sent. It was addressed to Ryan, a reflection of her feelings during the height of their connection. She read the words, surprised by how raw and honest they were. "Dear Ryan, I don't know if I'll ever give you this letter, but I need to put my feelings into words. What we shared was brief, but it changed me in ways I can't fully explain. You reminded me of parts of myself I thought I had lost. And for that, I'll always be grateful. But I know now that some connections aren't meant to last, they're meant to teach us, to help us grow. And you've done that for me. Thank you for being part of my journey, even if only for a little while. I wish you all the happiness in the world." Evelyn smiled as she folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer. It didn't need to be sent. She had already found her peace.